And good evening, YouTube. Hajim Zero here, back with another good set of movie reviews. It's going to be like the whole Resident Evil film series. So prepare to get strapped in, because I know how mixed at least the rest of the movies are versus the first one. So starting with the first one, this is Resident Evil 1. The movie came out 2002. Stars Milla Jovovich, Michelle Rodriguez, and I can't remember his name, Matt Mabius, I believe. Those are the main ones. And I can't remember the guy that played uh the character is supposed to be indirectly Hunk. I think his name was James Shade or something like that. But he's a known black actor from Britain. If you've seen the Pierce Brosnan James Bond movies, he's in those, and he's a really good actor. Hopefully, get to see more major roles on him. I want to say, was it for Idris, he would be up there, but Idris is also a good, black actor who's from Britain. But this movie, if you play the video games, is pretty much about the evil corporation. Well, it's a pharmaceutical company corporation that experiments with weaponry, and it's really the illegal kind. And this is a good piece of fiction because I think back then pharmaceutical companies, they were known to do some certain kind of testing as well as fucked up shit, technically dealing with healthcare. Especially it weighs heavy now, but I don't know how it was in 2002. I know it was some people and some knowledge knew about it, yeah, but thankfully for the internet age and how expensive it is today, more people know how messed up the healthcare system is and what they would do. But pretty much, they created a bioweapon called the T virus, and it brings the dead people back to life. It repowers the brain because they say that when you die, your brain is a little bit more active before it officially shuts down, and that's what it manipulates. And kind of like with The Walking Dead, it did the same thing. At least on the TV show, they really didn't explain it in the comics. But if you play the game, oh, excuse me, I just yawned and I haven't done it in a while. I'm irritated because you know how I don't like to talk and yawn at the same time. But if you play the games, when you read those files, they give more detail talking about what the virus does to that and other living organisms. And I don't know how much of it's from fact from reality because, this movie was based off of Resident Evil 1 and 2. There were some elements, technically all the game characters really aren't in there. William Birkin is at the very end when they come in to apprehend a mutated Matt, and who's going to be for the Nemesis Project, which is another name dropped from the game. And they come to get him and Alice. But again, some of the elements are the same, like the underground laboratory in the mansion is, and like I said, the liquor from Resident Evil 2 is like the final monster in here, and they did a very good job at the way that had looked. You know, uh, to what Alice pretty much wears with the red dress and the black boots was really a call on the character of Ada Wong, and of course Umbrella and Stars being mentioned. And to be honest, this movie is well, when it came out, and I think even today is one of the decent video game movies that's been made next to Mortal Kombat and what's the other one I'm thinking of? Prince of Persia. And another fun fact, speaking of Mortal Kombat, which I'm also going to review eventually, that movie was directed by Paul S. Anderson, who also did some of these Resident Evil films, and he even did the first one. And it really blows. I found out more additional information. George Romero was also attached to direct it, and it would have been interesting because a lot of the concepts, they came up with in the game indirectly came from him. When they eventually did uber smart zombies, and them grabbing weapons, and of course the whole zombie, concept. There were some elements, even in Resident Evil 2, it was really a callback to classic Romero films. And even on this film, where it says at the very end, the dead walk. it was really a reference to one of the titles of his movies. I think it was one of them I actually reviewed. I think it was Day of the Dead, when the newspaper blows by and you see the same title. And in this film, it's the newspaper hanging out of the car door, which is a callback to his film. And Romero, this ain't the first time he was involved with the Resident Evil project. He directed the commercial for the Resident Evil 2 video game with the late actor Brad DeFario, I believe. Maybe mispronouncing his name, but he was the one who played Leon. And there was actually a script that he had wrote, and I'm kind of curious because I heard rumors that they were gonna reboot the Resident Evil film series and actually make it scary. And I wonder if they're gonna look at his script and do something with it, because I really kind of curious to see how it was gonna be. Of course, the studio execs, I bet you it was Sony who didn't want, who just didn't want it at all. Because when I realized, I wonder why they didn't do it, and I was like, oh yeah, it is Sony, it is a corporation, and you have to bend to their will. And I know Romero, he isn't like that. When he made his movies, he it was independent. He was free to do what he want and had good amount of financing. And even he said, himself, I'm not looking for any major awards or this, that, and the other. I just love making, movies. If they give me an award, oh well. They don't, oh well. If you got money, you really don't care about shit like that. And I kind of agree. Even though he criticized The Walking Dead a certain way, but going back to this movie, it was kind of funny because I kind of jumped on board watching the movies before I played the game. I didn't play the game until Resident Evil 4 came out, and then it got me to play the rest of them. And it was funny what they were saying behind the scenes when they made Resident Evil 4. It was to indirectly give something back to the fans and also potentially draw a new audience. And it kind of did. I really wanted to go back and look at the story and look at the gameplay. And they also tried the same tactic with Resident Evil 5. It was a lot of people who played, Resident Evil 5 and they loved it, just the controls and the action, versus some of the fans who didn't. Even though I mixed on the whole thing, because Resident Evil 6 was also bad. The only good praise I did give it was the gameplay was very good. Like the whole system, like that was some of the best Resident Evil controls that they ever did. And of course Revelations, but I'm gonna talk about those later. But pretty much with this story, Alice is the main character, and she's employed by the corporation. She doesn't find this out until later. In the beginning of the movie, she has amnesia, and the strike team comes in and they tell her everything. And make a long story short, I'm not gonna really spoil it, but in the group, they find there's pretty much three people not attached to the strike team. Let's just say one of them is the reason why the virus had broke out in the laboratory in the first place, and the computer's advanced AI had sealed them all down there to prevent it getting out. And if you play the first game, really, I see Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil 1, the remake, all like one story, back to back. I liked what they did with this movie. It did give it a different feel, but at the same time, there were some elements that were from the game that were actually the same. For one, the claustrophobicness when you play those games, and not to mention the fixed camera that's in there. Now, the fixed camera is not, of course, in the movie, which I think it would have worked, because one of the terrifying things that I discovered from playing the game, even in they stopped doing it after Resident Evil 4 though, but when you can see the character and the character's looking at something off screen, but you can't see it, and that's scary to me. And I think if they would have had a little bit elements of that, it would have made the film a little bit stronger. Hopefully they put that psychological play in the reboot of the film, because they could take a cue from I Am Legend, because it kind of did the same thing on top of no music being there, but it was more of what you couldn't see that gave the fear. Is it really there or not? So the entire time they're trying to really, the whole movie, they're trying to escape the facility, because right after a good half of their team is killed, That's when I realized that no one else is coming and they only have 2 hours to get out before the door is shut and they're trapped down there. Now, pretty much with the film series, it was really trying to make its own universe, and I give it credit on that because they made some novels, in between sequels that answered certain questions, especially when we get to Resident Evil 2 and 3 and possibly, well, definitely Afterlife, but um pretty much this movie really stands strong without the lore of the game. And like I said, if you ask, certain video game nerds and film nerds who can come together and look at this movie, they will possibly say that out of all the Resident Evil, oh no, not Resident Evil, but video game films, this is one of the ones that are decent. I think Mortal Kombat still has reigned supreme because they haven't made a good video game movie in like a long time, or at least a decent one. Like I said, Prince of Persia is the only one I can really think of, that was decent, and not really bad awful. The argument is up for debate. But pretty much this movie had I wouldn't say launched Milla Jovovich's career, but it got her much more recognition. Even Michelle Rodriguez, even though she came off of Fight Girl, or no, Girl Fight, my bad, and Fast and the Furious, and right after Fast and the Furious, she did this, and then you started seeing more of her, and I like all the actors that were in this. I try to look up other stuff that they have done. Is a very few. I think they did this in Canada, and some of the other B-list actors. They are known, but at the same time they're not famous. Spencer Locke is in this. He I'm not going to mention who he is, in this movie, but he has some credits. But it's pretty much like out of the whole project, only like four celebrity names stand out, and this is really really nostalgic for me because it came out 2002, and I wasn't playing any games yet because I was kind of poor. But uh, like I said, I liked how they deviated from the games and it still worked. My issue a little bit is that if they do reboot it, they have to go with one of the additional fear that the first game did, which is keep it in the mansion, and then they eventually do find the underground laboratory and still do some things that are different because mansions are scary, and that was one of the whole indirect premise that the game had captured, and they got that idea from another game called Homefront, which is a Japanese supernatural game that was in a mansion, and that's where the whole concept for the game originally came from. And it was fun. I remember I was younger, I was debating with another Resident Evil fan why didn't they do the mansion, and I think she misinterpreted my question, but mainly I didn't have a grasp on the whole, better wording on it, saying, yeah, I thought the mansion was the whole premise of scaring the shit out of you, and then you eventually found out it was a biological weapon. It wasn't a supernatural entity. Because I remember my cousin Derek playing the game for the PS1, and it scared the hell out of me, And I'm just watching, spectating, despite the bad dialogue and everything else. But pretty much they need to go with that angle, mansions are terrifying, and you can do it with the supernatural or a scientific explanation, and it still works. And if you play the remake of the game, they added some additional good elements that also scared the hell out of you, like some of the enemies kicking the door down. They may move certain enemies. They added two new enemies to the game. If you don't burn the bodies of the zombies, they turn into a crimson head, which is pretty much like those Dawn of the Dead zombies that chase you partially. They move a hell of a lot quicker. And it was some very, very good concepts. And I can't wait to eventually replay those games again because I'm creating my own horror story, which is loosely based, were inspired by Resident Evil, government corporations that are willing to do illegal research if it's a breakthrough through science and pretty much play God. You can look at Jurassic World, Jurassic Park, with the same concept. But it was a very, very decent film that came out in 2000, and I could, well, technically for video game films, and I really really enjoyed it. And that's pretty much all I have to say. I will see you in the next one, which is Resident Evil Apocalypse, and I will talk to you later. Peace.